welcome to the Culinary Time Machine. I am Chef Nakia, and in this show, we discover the history and evolution of cooking. And in today's episode, we are going to talk about the impact that conflict had on our cooking and the impact that cooking had on conflict. So for about 95% of human history, we lived as hunter-gatherers. And where we've gotten to within our episodes from episode 1 and 2, we're still very much in that hunter-gatherer time frame, right? So we talked about the archaeological evidence for the harnessing of fire happening about 780,000 years ago, and maybe some of the first signs of dabbling in agriculture happening 19 to 20,000 years ago, and written human history and such happening around 6,000 years ago. So this episode, we are mostly going to talk about the, before 20,000 years ago to 700,000 years ago type of time frame. But we will reference a few moments in time that are recorded in human history too. So before we talk about conflict too much, let's first try to put ourselves in the place of a person living in a hunter-gatherer society. You know that feeling when you are camping with friends? You might not even need to be camping, but you are just sitting outside around a campfire or a bonfire, and the sun is going down, and maybe you've just finished eating, and that sense of connection that you feel with the people that are around you. There's something, right, so universally comforting around sitting around that campfire with people we love and the types of conversations that come from those types of scenarios. It shows that everyone is very comfortable, right? We are vulnerable. Typically, we are vulnerable when we are comfortable, and a lot of times vulnerable conversations happen around campfires. And I don't know if you felt this or not, but think back to the last time that you were sitting around a campfire, and did you feel like a deep tie to human nature, right? Did you feel a sense of feeling closer with all humans who have ever existed in time? It wouldn't be surprising if you have, because that practice of spending the evening around the campfire, eating, and then socializing with your tight-knit band of other hunter-gatherers is something that humans have probably been doing for hundreds of thousands of years. And the fire can mean so many things. Yes, like safety and warmth, which is very nice. But once we started cooking food, it became a huge symbol of mealtime. And yes, even whenever we could cook food, it's not like 100% of the foods that we ate were cooked. We still, could eat fresh berries and nuts, but we could also then cook meats or cook grains and make porridges and those kinds of things. So I think that's why we feel that unique atmosphere around a campfire. And I think that this relates to how food and conflict interact with each other, because you feel that strong bond with the people around you. When we think about food and conflict and cooking, it begins with those social ties, and conflict arises between two or more people. And you have to have some established bonds in order for the potential for conflict to really, become what it is. So to get a little bit of a deeper insight into hunter-gatherer societies, let's think about what the priorities for an average hunter-gatherer would have been. The number one priority is food. It is gathering enough food. It is finding places that have an abundance of food for themselves and the other people in their band. It is feeling a sense of food security. So another higher priority would be finding shelter or creating shelter, whether that is in like a cave, like or a naturally occurring place that is fairly sheltered from the elements, or creating shelter. Another high priority would be those social connections, the kinship with other people in your band, trading stories. And then another high priority would be finding stone tools or other tools or creating those tools. So whether that's like flint arrowheads or weaving baskets, like turning animal skins into clothing, creating other like tools and weapons and knives, utilizing shells as like kind of like spoons or shovels to like dig, shaping clay, and creating pottery. And so those are 4 top priorities of hunter-gatherers, and food is just one of those. However, all 4 can relate to food too. A lot of the tools that we were creating were meant to either make hunting or cooking easier. The kinship that we feel with each other oftentimes is shared or over meals. And as far as a shelter, of course you want to protect yourself with that shelter, but you may also be protecting food that you had gathered, so that if it rains, your grains or nuts are not left out in the rain to then maybe mold in a few days. So of course, all of these things are interconnected in many ways, but food and cooking is absolutely going to be a high priority for hunter-gatherers, and really a main pillar in how they decide what they're going to do within the day. So how would this have impacted conflict? Well, I see one of the first and most obvious ways in that if your band is around a source of food that is plentiful enough for your band, but still may be a little limited in how many people it can feed, and a different band of hunter-gatherers comes into the area, that could cause tension. And depending on if there is enough food to feed everybody, or if that resource is monopolized by one group over another, that could absolutely create some conflict there. Now, hopefully, more often than not, people feel like they can share. But I am sure throughout the history of hunter-gatherers, there were times whenever that the feeling of working together was not mutual, and competition arose. So another potential opportunity for conflict could have come around tools and different technological advancements. So if you met up with another band of hunter-gatherers and they had much sharper flint stones, and you notice that, there's a potential that they could teach you maybe how to make those, or what, you could have a sharing of knowledge, or there could be theft where you would say, okay, those sharp stones look great, we're gonna take those, right? That can also create conflicts. And how that applies to cooking is because you are probably going to be using those sharper knives to hunt and to break down that food to cook it. Also, other like cooking technologies. So many of the ways that hunter-gatherers probably would have cooked was like open fire cooking, right? Like putting meats on a stick and holding it over the fire, or building some type of spit and rotating and roasting that meat, putting food on a hot stone near the fire and allowing it to cook that way, simmering, boiling food. And the way that people would have done that in prehistoric times would have been heating stones in the fire and then moving those to water and adding enough stones for the temperature of the water to get up to that simmering or boiling point, and then you can add your food in. So seeing these technological advances within ways of cooking, right? If you've never utilized anything similar to a spit style cooking and then you see somebody else do it, it's possible that you would want to steal their tools instead of creating your own. Very obviously, famine and major weather changes could also create conflict. This is pretty similar to the first one in like a lack of abundance in a source of food and too many people trying to harvest that for themselves. But if you are in an area and historically, as in like for a few generations, you've pretty consistently been able to acquire a lot of consistent food sources from, you know, maybe you have like 10 different areas that your hunter-gatherer group typically goes. Well, with, you know, precipitation and temperature changes, maybe there are herds of animals that are no longer grazing in the area that overlaps with where you are used to going. Maybe there's vegetation that goes extinct or at least does not grow in that area anymore. And so because of those weather pattern changes, you may need to look further for food. And if some of that food is already not becoming as abundant, then you may have multiple bands of hunter-gatherers all kind of ending up in more densely populated areas, trying to all take advantage of a smaller amount of available food. So you can see how that would pretty easily impact conflict. And now as we move from hunter-gatherer into agrarian societies, famines, because of weather cycle changes, are going to be very common, and like that is something that is going to remain for tens of thousands of years. Even today, we aren't that far removed from famine having a huge impact on our society. So this basic principle of too many hungry bellies to be fed, not enough food when we expected for there to be enough food, causing conflict, is definitely a constant theme throughout human history and prehistory. Now, just because the reality of there being more people than there is available food. Oh, she jumped on my computer. Well, okay, this is Smokey, everybody, again. You guys enjoyed when she joined a couple episodes ago. Just because this consistent principle of not enough availability of food, not enough food available to the number of hungry tummies exists throughout history and prehistory doesn't mean that there are not peaceful ways to solve this problem. Trade and peaceful trading can be a great way to avoid conflict. Does not mean that there was always very peaceful trade. So let's skip ahead in time to like the 1500s in what is now present day, like New Mexico, Arizona area of the US. So we can still look at some hunter-gatherer societies living very close to agrarian societies. In the, like, if you think of Navajo and Apache, in a semi-sedentary, a little more hunter-gatherer style lifestyle. Oftentimes they would follow herds of buffalo throughout the plains, and then like Tewa and Zuni and Hopi as examples of more agrarian focused societies. Definitely more sedentary. They would grow corn and other crops, and even if they did hunt, they would typically not necessarily follow like herds in migratory patterns. It would be more like, oh, if deer are moving through our area, we can hunt those. So the kind of the difference between the more sedentary and then the semi-sedentary, what would be more like hunter-gatherer versus agrarian. So the Hopi and Zuni and Tewa and Apache and Navajo at times traded peacefully. Sedentary tribes could trade surplus corn and ceramics and turquoise and cotton for surplus from the migratory tribes, buffalo meat and hides and tallow and salt. So whenever there is a surplus, it's much easier to peacefully trade that surplus in and amongst each other. However, sometimes the more sedentary tribes would have disagreements over the arable land because they wanted to farm and grow more food to, support their communities. And so whenever you have multiple tribes all wanting to farm the same land, that is going to easily be able to create a conflict there. And when within our more migratory hunter-gatherer, like what we would relate to more hunter-gatherer tribes, if their people were starving, they might go in and raid a settlement of Hopi to feed their people. So sometimes they may trade peacefully and sometimes they may raid and take from others in order to, help themselves survive. And that is something that I am sure was happening in prehistoric hunter-gatherer societies. And then even into as people were starting to form agrarian societies, you have to imagine that there was a speckling, right? Plenty of migratory tribes close to plenty of agrarian tribes. And so I could see this type of a conflict, like what we saw in the 1500s here in New Mexico, Southern Colorado, Arizona area, that type of a conflict happening for thousands of years. So that is how I see food and cooking impacting conflict over time and over our history and prehistory. Mostly on the prehistory though. As we continue in this show and we get more into written history time periods, then we will be able to talk about more specific moments of conflict, and exactly what led to them when it comes to food, right? I'm not gonna go through every conflict in written history on this show, but the ones that are very much centered around food, I will be very interested to do additional shows about that. And it's not like I like the negative aspect of the conflict around food, but it is interesting, and it's food and not having enough food has absolutely shaped human history over time. Also, the technology that exists around cooking food has impacted human history a lot, especially within conflict. So that is why I will be talking about it more, not because I want to bum anyone out, but the reality is there is a fair amount of conflict throughout history, and oftentimes the series of events that led to that conflict it's pretty interesting to learn about. So throughout the show, we'll just talk more about specific instances, but this hopefully gives you the foundation of just how long conflict around food has existed and why, as humans, it is so important for us to understand that unfortunately food and conflict oftentimes do exist together. Let me know what you think in the comments, and if you love this subject of the history of food and evolution of cooking, subscribe And if you know anybody who you think would really enjoy this, send the channel to them or send the video to them. Let me know what topics you find the most interesting. Next time we will be talking about how styles of cooking evolved. In this video, I briefly mentioned kind of the open fire style of cooking, along with like the very beginning of boiling and simmering foods, but we will go into a lot more detail in 2 weeks. I'll put out new episodes every 2 weeks. Thank you so much for watching.